Chuck asked me, he said, well, what title do you want to give? It's like, I want to stay away from the department so that I can speak and not have to worry about anybody judging what I say over there. I am a Christian, so it does come out of me, so I hope I don't offend any of y'all, but I do speak from a Christian point of view. And I will tell you, I love being at these events where there's good people. I really like being around good people. After a number of years in the police department and patrol, 6 years that I patrolled, I was in pretty much a bad area of town, and you kind of get tired of the negative aspect of everything, and so it's always great to be in a place where we got good people. I see a lot of familiar faces, one person who's an antagonist every chance he gets with me, but most of them are friendly. When Chuck was talking about what we have coming up in a couple of weeks, I've done, and that's how I know how long I've known Chuck. I met him 7 years ago when I was putting together my first faith-based crime prevention conference. The city has gone to where I can't use faith anymore, so now it's a crime prevention conference. But the target audience is still people from places of worship. And basically, we don't get into doctrine, but we discuss ways to safeguard you in your places of worship. It started out with how to build a safety team or security team, and we've added to that each year. This year, we're going to discuss the key topics are going to be target recognition, de-escalation techniques. I'm going to do just a brief summary of active shooter because that's always in the forefront of everybody's mind. But really, when you're looking at problems that come along, de-escalation techniques are probably going to help you in just about every situation, and oftentimes keep it from getting to that point where you're going to have to get physical or maybe even use a weapon. So if you're interested in attending that, I've got some flyers. I'll make sure they're out there that you can get to. You can also email me. That will be on August 24th at the Embassy Suites here in Denton at the Convention Center. And again, you'll be fed in the morning. They'll have coffee and water throughout the day for you as well. Nice venue there, so if you're interested, let me know. There's no cost to attend. We do open it up to anybody, so you don't have to be representing the faith-based organization. If you do, I do like to get contact information so that when we have information that we'd like to get out to all of you, that I can email it out pretty easily that way. For today, Chuck had talked to me about attending this conference and speaking, so I was really flattered that he asked me. He wanted to talk about interaction with law enforcement and how you would respond in the situation if you were in a violent episode in your place of worship, in your school, or wherever that may be. So this is the first time I've really put this presentation together. It's kind of a mixture of some that I've done in the past. I used to be a public information officer, and one time I got called to Fox News and their little setup in Dallas to be interviewed on their morning show, and I was getting blinded just like I am right now with these lights. I looked like a deer in the headlights, so if I look like that to you, I apologize, but my eyes don't do very well with bright lights. But anyway, active shooter, just kind of go over so we'll familiarize ourselves. I think we all know what an active shooter is, but the key point in this is an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people. So they have a weapon, they go into place, and for whatever reason, they are resolved to cause as many casualties as possible. They're unpredictable, they evolve very quickly. Typically, the immediate deployment of law enforcement is necessary to stop this violent act, and usually the active shooter is going to continue to move throughout the building or that facility until they've been stopped by law enforcement, someone there, or they commit suicide. Every once in a while somebody slips away, and usually they're surprised by that. They're usually at that location and they're resolved to lose their life to carry out this event, this violent episode that they had planned and intended to carry out. Again, that key is actively engaged, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So let's just look at the Columbine incident. In April 1999, April 20th, there were 13 people killed, 20 wounded by Eric Harritz and Dylan Klebold, who was 18 and 17 both. So at 11:19 that day, they show up to the school. Actually, they'd been there for a little while, but 11:19, they're dressed in their trench coats, and they began shooting fellow students outside the school. Who wasn't aware that they shot people outside the school? Several people here. I actually wasn't aware of that until recently. I thought all the carnage happened inside. Sullivan Springs, something more recent that y'all heard of in our backyard, same thing. There were 100 rounds that were fired off outside before the attacker went inside the building. That's pretty good warning, isn't it? That something's happening. And then you'll hear me, if you ever hear me talk on this subject, you'll hear me say it time and time again. A failure to act is the worst thing that we can do. And in those situations, that's what happened. Failure to act costs a lot of lives and caused more to be wounded. So 11:19, they go in, they start shooting fellow students. Most of what the carnage they did was in the library. 11:35, after they'd killed 12 students and a teacher and then wounded 20 other people, they turned the guns on themselves just shortly after noon. So they had arrived actually at the school at 11:10 in different cars. So they get duffel bags, they go inside into the cafeteria and they deploy these duffel bags that have a propane tank made into a bomb. And it's supposed to go off in a few minutes. They go outside and wait. Nothing happens. So I guess Google didn't work out well for them on that situation. However, once they got past 11:17, then they come in and they start shooting. So they shoot and they shoot and they shoot and they take a lot of people down. And of course, since then we've learned a lot from Columbine, and of course we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So here is a picture of our tactical team from the law enforcement agency that I work for, and you see them huddled around some video equipment. And what are they doing right now? Yeah, gathering information, right? Gathering intelligence. When I was on our tactical team, that's one of the things, if we were going to serve a warrant, if we were going to go and maybe there was some type of hostage situation or whatever, we would debrief and we would plan how we were going to act on that. I think it was 2003, around that, a woman who had a history of mental illness and drug use, she finally lost her rights to her child, and her child was at a church on the other side of town. She came up to the church, took the little girl by force, and left and ended up in Valley View. She didn't shoot anybody there, but she had pointed the gun and threatened to kill him. And then we got called as a TAC team to come respond because Valley View didn't have any type of response. They had, I only think, a couple of officers that even worked for them at the time. But nevertheless, she was held up in that building. We would call that a barricaded situation. So when we arrived there, we had planned on what we were going to do, so we sat and waited. And it wasn't a whole lot of fun because it was a very cold winter day, and it was raining and sleeting and snowing all through the night. I was fortunate because I was put on the second team to be deployed at 6 a.m. the next morning. The statistics show that if somebody takes somebody hostage over a certain number of hours, they're resolved to kill that victim. So in a nutshell, we tried to communicate with her over and over again, and finally our last plan was we were going to breach the window, throw in a box phone that she could talk to us with, and try to negotiate to get her out. My job was to breach the window in the bedroom that we believed that she was in. So I breached the window. As soon as I hit it, she started shooting out of that window. And we just kind of went from there. Afterwards, fortunately, she did lose her life, but the child was safe and nobody else was injured. Afterwards, we met and debriefed and we discussed things. Well, one of the TV stations who had been out there for a while sent us the video that they had taken from that episode. And afterwards, we had already debriefed and we're watching this, and there were things that I had done in time that it continued to go on that I didn't realize had happened. The only reason I responded the way I did, and I kept thinking, why did I do this? Why didn't I run and hide after the shots came? Or why didn't I do this? Well, it was ultimately it's because the training we had done over and over and over. It becomes repetitious. So I really didn't have a response of throwing down the breaching tool and running. It was continue to finish that job and move, and for our team to move forward. But again, that is a barricaded person situation. When you look here and you're thinking of Columbine, that was probably a lot of the response right there. Did anybody remember when that was going on and it was on TV and the news stations, and there was all these different reports coming out how they hadn't found them, or now we think that they come in contact with them, they think they've got them held up somewhere. Well, by the time they had killed himself, I don't think they had even started to enter that building. So a lot of things had happened, and we're still sitting back waiting how are we going to respond to this? So let's go back. How much time had passed from when they entered that building? Yeah, over 40 minutes. About 3/4 of an hour before they turned the gun on themselves. So, do we really have the option of waiting outside and putting together a plan? So I guess it was toward the end of 1999, myself and 3 other members of our tactical team went to Dallas, and we worked with them in some training to try and put together an active shooter response. And we kind of came up with this model. So that's kind of what you would see to begin with. This is how police departments were training. You would have a heavy head. That's where you've got basically 3 people moving in front in lead, and then you're going to have somebody trailing. So that trail man would usually, their offhand would grab the back shirt or something on one of the officers and trail behind so they could see if anybody was coming up behind to ambush. Do we have any law enforcement in here? How long do you think it would take to get 4 people to that location? 4 to 6 minutes. And that's if you're probably in a smaller location. If you're in a very large metropolitan area, depending on what's going on, let's say shift change is taking place or something like that, you could have 10 minutes before that second or third officer arrive. And again, what is the clock doing? Tick, tick, tick. How long does it take to squeeze a trigger? How long does it take to find a target? So as law enforcement, we kind of backed up and we looked at that situation. So we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. I want to talk about the staff or security reactions from your place of worship or your business or your facility. I assume most of you are here representing a church. Anybody ever been in a situation where it was just chaotic? Something happened, you heard a loud bang, there was lightning struck, fire happened. What usually happens at that point? Everybody gets on a single file line and they go very quietly and neatly out the door, right? Doesn't happen that way, does it? It's amazing how people will react in a situation and they just lose it. It's like they're a contestant on Let's Make a Deal, and they're running down, People just do all types of things. Some people freeze, some people push people over. Some people, get on the ground and crawl. Some people will run out, and some people just scream and scream and scream. We don't have that luxury to do that. Somebody has to be the lead person. And what you're going to see happen, the people in your church, your place of worship, they're going to be looking to you guys that are in here. So why are they going to be looking to you? Because they know that you came to the training. They know that your responsibility is for safety for those folks in your place of worship, right? If we don't respond correctly, they're not going to respond correctly. Sutherland Springs, 100 rounds were shot off outside of that building, of that church, before the gunman went inside. People inside were instructed during that time to lay down between the pews. So the gunmen came in very methodically, boom, 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 went to the next aisle and so forth. That was their instruction. Get down on the ground and hide. Obviously that didn't work, did it? Not trying to beat up on anybody from that congregation. I'm sure they were telling them what they thought was the right thing to do. But a failure to act is not in the cards for us. We don't have we don't have that luxury. We've got to do something. So if you are on a team, if you are one of the leaders of your church or your place of worship, you've got to take action. And you've got to be confident when you do it. All right, let's get out through this exit door right here. Make sure and turn outside to the left. We're going to meet down at the park down at the corner. Start getting people out. What do you need to do in that situation? Again, there's no predictability what's going to happen once that event starts to take place. With Columbine, the plan was for a bomb to go off first. That didn't happen. So even if you had intelligence of this going on, you would have to go to plan B to respond to this, wouldn't you? Because you would be focused on the area where the bomb was, and the bomb didn't go off. Now you've got 2 active shooters starting outside and moving their way inside. So wherever that violent act takes place, you're going to have to be ready to respond to that. Are you in the location with that active shooter? What if you are? What are you going to do? How many people do you have on your safety team that are in probably the main area that you're probably going to have an active shooter, which would be in the sanctuary? Or it could be where, just like on a lot of the situations, active shooter, they start outside because they just can't wait that long. They're too nervous. They're afraid somebody's going to get them or somebody's going to stop them, and they're not going to be able to carry out their act, so they start on the first targets that they see instead of coming inside and walking and getting everybody by surprise. So we've got to be able to stay calm. We've got to be able to lead. We have to be able to give good commands, and we need to know what to do. Where are the exit points in our building? Where do we want to send people? Well, normally we'd want to send them out here, but what if the active shooter or the active violent person is over here? Where do we want to send them? Now it would be at this exit, or maybe it'd be over here. If we're not practicing these things, if we're not discussing these hypotheticals, then we're not going to be prepared at that situation. I stood like a fool while bullets are coming through a window at me because that's what I was trained to do. And if I didn't, we wouldn't have carried out the procedure that we had in place, the plan we had in place. If you're not thinking about this, if you only think about it once or talk about it once, chances are you're not going to react that way when that act happens. You've got to go through repetition. Training is very key. So we're in a situation, we can't get them outside. We want to stay calm and maybe get them into the right place. We want to secure doors. They're over here. We know there's nobody over here. Let's lock these doors. There's people in there where they can't get he can't get in there and cause more destruction, more carnage. Over here we've got people. There's an exit right nearby. Let's get them out that exit. Tell them to rally over here at the corner by the storage building out there. We have to take all these things in consideration. Also, what could happen when you're leaving the building? Yeah, you could have a sniper that's waiting out there. They may have just, flushed everybody out that way so he could pick them off one by one. So you have to be careful when you're going out there and be ready to encounter something else. This may be a single active shooter, but you may think it is, and there may be one or two more people involved. So trying to be prepared for that second gunman or third, fourth, whatever it may be. Again, if you don't have the choice of evacuating, where are we going to put these people? The wall back here, on the back wall back here, what is it made of? Yeah, concrete blocks. Is that going to give us cover? More than likely, unless they're just really heavily armed. It's going to stop a pistol bullet and probably most rifle bullets. What is cover anyway? How do we define that? Yeah, that's the simplest way to put it. Cover is something that stops a bullet. Concealment is something I can get behind and you don't see me, but it is a wall that's got sheetrock on this side and sheetrock on this side and studs every 16 inches in between. Is that going to stop a bullet?
Only if you're really lucky.
Yeah, only if you're really lucky. Every once in a while, but most of the time it's going to penetrate both of those very easily. And if you're on the other side of that, then you could be a victim even though you thought you were in a secure area. So if you take somebody into a room, let's say you're pushing them down to the children's nursery because there's a room in there that's big enough, it's away from where all the violent acts are going place, you can lock them in there. Where are you going to put them? You probably want to stay away from the door. I'm real careful when I talk about staying away from the door because a lot of the doors that we have, especially in schools, are going to be solid core doors. They can stop a heavy round. But those thin walls where you have 3/4 inch, or nowadays it's a 1/2 inch sheetrock on one side, 1/2 inch sheetrock on the other side, will that start the bullets? Now I'm not aware of any active shooter in the past where they just went and shooting in the walls hoping to hit people on the other side, but that could happen. So if let's say you take them in that room, you need to be thinking ahead, what am I going to do? How am I going to protect these people in here? He can't breach that door, and if he does, we're going to catch him by surprise. But what if he shoots through the walls? How do I protect people? Well, these tables probably aren't going to stop much right here, but most classrooms have tables that are pretty thick. You could start to line them up along the wall and tell people to get down where it gives them a little bit more stopping power for if a bullet were coming through that wall. But think about these things. Don't just think about locking yourself up in a room. While you're doing that, what else should you be thinking about? What's that?
Plan of action.
Yeah, what do I do if he comes through that door, how can we stop him? Look around and find a weapon. This could be your weapon. Throwing this at him as he comes through the door, he's going to have to react. Either he tries to take aim and gets hit by it, or he drops the weapon, or he ducks and moves to keep from being hit by that podium. He's still going to have, you're going to redirect what he's doing, which gives you time to gain the upper advantage on him, get hands on him, and everybody gets and takes him down. But think about what you're going to do all through that process. The one thing that we can't stop doing is thinking. Consider what we would do. That's where you, when you're getting with your teams together, and when you're training, you're meeting, you're talking about hypotheticals. Okay, let's say somebody comes in here. Where are we going to move people? What about the children? What are we going to do with them? If we lock them up in the rooms that they're in already, how do we safeguard them in there right now? Well, instead of having the bookcases over on this side of the wall, let's put them on this side of the wall that is next to the hallway. A book that's that thick and that long or wide, will that stop a bullet? You have them all pressed together in a bookcase? That would do a pretty good cover for you, wouldn't it? So think about these things when you're even setting up the classrooms and such in your place of worship. Sure, it looks good over here, but talk to your teachers and say, you know, this would actually be a little bit more safe if we put it on this side of the room, and you can put your pictures or whatnot on this side of the room over here. So again, you're utilizing the resources you have there, not just as a library, but also as a way to stop any type of projectile that may be coming through that room. What happens when the police arrive? What's that? Yeah, nowadays, and you're seeing that more and more training. Now, when we started in 1999 and we started enrolling that training in our police department, you would start to run into officers. Every so often, you'd run into officers from a different agency that had the training, but it was a very slow process of getting law enforcement trained. Now, they're teaching this in academy. So when we have the new officers, the cadets come in, they're already trained on active shooter. But officers, I mean, they're human. They're going to be pumping blood through their heart a whole lot faster because of this situation. And they genuinely want to stop that person. They don't want any person harmed, so they're going to be trying to get there as quickly as possible, and they're not going to be focused on anything but stopping that violent target. So it's going to be a little bit chaotic for them as well. And how do people react in a chaotic situation? Again, let's make a deal. Let's run down the aisle and scream and holler and stuff, right? So they're going to have to they're looking for a target, but they're going to have people coming at them as well, and people trying to stop them, and somebody saying, my husband's been shot, help him. And then they're going to be yelling, help us, there's a gunman. And what are they going to be trying to do? So you've got to be able to try and do the best to help them out. Now, first off, you immediately want to make sure that they see your hands. Let's say if you are LTC, do you want to put that weapon down? Or make sure that you do what the officer tells you. It may not seem sensible at the time, but that could save your life right there, because all they know is that there's gunfire going off in this building, so they're looking for somebody with what? Right. So, you know, you may have the sashes that you throw over your shoulder that say security or whatever. Some are big proponents for that, some aren't. But let's say that you have that on. Again, will that officer notice that when he has tunnel vision when he's coming through? What he's really looking for is in your hands. So make sure that you're very aware of that. Secondly, get your hands in the air. Make very slow movements, though. Don't make any quick actions toward them. If they tell you to be still, then be still. Tell you to get your hands in the air, get your hands in the air. But do what they're telling you so that you don't alarm them. Normally what we're going to do is we're going to see, we're going to assess, and then we're going to move on. Looks like a normal person, no weapons. Keep moving, keep moving. We hear a gunshot, we're going to be trying to move in that direction. So we don't want to disturb that. Understand also, and I think probably most of you in here have heard this before, we are not stopping to tend to the injured. We'll step over bodies or whatever, we're going to stop that active shooter. Because what is he doing? He's actively looking for targets and firing at targets. If we stop to patch this guy up, then we're going to have more victims. So we don't have time to do that. Have y'all discussed in your place of worship assembly points? I see some heads nodding. I see some that are like, why didn't we think of that? Well, we think about the biggest aspect of it, right? The bad guy. How are we going to stop him? How are we going to get to him? What are we going to do when we find him? Well, we don't think about the rallying points, other things. And it could be, most places of worship have something nearby. I know of several churches here in Denton that are smaller churches, but they have a little park nearby. Maybe that's where you want to rally to. But think about different points. And you probably need to name several points that's depending. You don't know where in your facility that this is taking place. Think about Denton Bible. You've got that very large sanctuary over here. You have the training center over here. You have storage buildings, other buildings around. So there's a whole lot more that you've got to take into consideration there as well. Where are we going to meet afterwards? Most likely, you're going to be held there for a while. We've got a lot to decipher once we show up on the scene. We take the person down, now we've got to figure out what happened. Could one of you that are outside have been part of what took place in that church? So we have to consider that too. So we want to keep everybody there. Most of it is just getting witness information, having you tell us what you saw, what took place. And after a very chaotic situation like that, oftentimes we get the very serious aspect of it, and a lot of the details are left out. So then chances are you're going to be interviewed again a day or two later when you start to calm down and other details start to come to you. Just like at Valley View, afterwards I'm thinking, I don't remember doing that, and I certainly don't remember doing that. But then it all started to come back to me as time went on, and I remember those little aspects of it. It's funny, as I'll tell you, I didn't have hearing protection on that day. But as my partner, who was cover on me, as he returned fire, his AR-15, it sounded like pop, 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 about that loud. Anybody heard it? AR-15 next to your ear, about that far away. All these things happen to you when you're under stress. You have to consider that. So we're looking to neutralize the situation, get everything under hand, and start treating the victims. So, when you have a chaotic situation like this, what's going to happen? Well, let's put it this way. You have a 5-car pileup at Loop 288 and 380. Officers drive by, what do? They weren't sent to that call, they're off duty, what are they going to do? Unless somebody's injured, of course. You have an active shooter situation, what are they going to do?
Everybody's coming.
Yeah, everybody's coming. So you may have somebody in an ugly, awful Texas Longhorn shirt. I'm a Sooner fan, so I had to get that out. But if he's in law enforcement and he's off duty, he may very well show up in that shirt. He's probably going to have a badge hanging around his neck or attached to his belt, and he's coming in. He may not have a vest on. You may see everybody looks like ninjas dressed up in black and having all types of garb on. You may see a mixture of that. Somebody's got jeans on, but they got a vest over them, they got a helmet on, glasses, and they've got an AR-15. Somebody may show up with a shotgun, somebody may show up with a Glock 17. So be prepared to see a lot of different faces and even different uniforms, because that information goes out and everybody wants to respond. Know and understand that you're going to see that and respond just the way that we talked about earlier. Do what you're told, everything will be fine afterwards. Hey, you may get shoved to the ground. We're just trying to get everything under control. When I was with the tactical team and we served a high-risk warrant, we came in the house and we were pushing people down, getting them on the ground. We didn't have time to wait for them because we didn't know if they were going to pick up a weapon and try to attack us or what. We apologized afterwards, of course, and gave Band-Aids if there were any little scrapes or abrasions, but we have to do that to protect ourselves and protect the innocent that are in there, usually children as well. So be prepared for that as well. Do what you're told. Everything will be much better afterwards. So the active shooter response now. We talked about it, what it started out in its fledgling stage. So what are we doing now? You may very well have that first person go in. Hopefully he's got a backup. Now, I will say when I was on the tactical team and we trained on active shooter, I was on the Delta squad, so we always practiced together and the different squads practiced together. And so my partner, Al Orozco, who was in the stick right next to me, I always knew pretty much, no matter what the circumstances were, in this situation he's going to do this, in this situation he's going to do that, and he was the same with me. We entered a room, we knew we were going to L the room, so I'm going to go this direction, he's going to go that way, and we're going to focus from out to in looking for suspects. I just knew that's what was going to happen. He knew the same thing with me. No matter what they threw at us, we were prepared what the other person was going to do. So we just recently, a week ago, we started doing active shooter training again at the Denton Police Department. And so we're at one of the local schools, and I had a new officer. He's probably has about a year's experience, and I was teamed up with him. And so we were sitting down the hallway. We just told that shots had been fired, and so we're looking as we go to the doorways. And you're supposed to go in the room, L it, and then come back out. Well, he went in and got about 3 steps in, and I was right behind him. When I went in, he turned around and hit me coming back out. And then we went to the next room. And when we got to the next room, he went in, stopped at the door, and I couldn't get in. So I'm trying to get him in. Well, about that time, we were using ammunition rounds, kind of like a paintball. They sting when you get hit with them. And suddenly I felt a very warm burning in the back of my neck, as I just had an ambush from one of the role players that in one of the rooms that we had bypassed. So I've had all this extensive training, been with the tactical team for 6 years, and I'm with somebody else that's new that just recently had been trained on that, and things didn't go so well, right? So we're trying to train more and more so that I thought it was great training, because you have to consider, maybe I needed to be more assertive with this young officer and say, get in that room, or let me take lead, whatever it needed to be done. But the training aspect is very important. You see, when things aren't trained, when you hadn't trained properly, what could happen. Fortunately, it happened in a mock situation and not a real situation. Even if it was a 22, I think it's not going to turn out too well if you get shot in the back of the neck, right? Any doctors in here? So this is probably what you're going to see. And instead of having that heavy head and having a trailer, basically the two are going to be side by side going down the hallway, and they're going to hit one room to the next unless they hear shots, and then they're going to bypass those rooms very quickly. So as they go by, they're going to be looking in that room, and then they're going to be focusing back down and moving very quickly, looking at each door as they pass by to get to the sound of the shots being fired. And they're probably going to scan, they should be scanning periodically, just looking back to make sure that they're not being ambushed, because that has happened in a few scenarios where someone waited back and waited for the responders to go by. What you're also going to see is an assessment. And this is going to be very difficult for those officers that are the first ones responding, but they're going to be looking as they go by, as they pass targets or victims, and assess what is their situation. Well, they see somebody holding their neck and they're bleeding very bad and they're a big pool of blood. That person's just not going to live, are they? We have to make a very difficult situation. This person is not going to survive. We don't have time to deal with them. Who are the people that are going to survive, and who needs that attention right now? We'll try to get that information out to EMS. It may be a situation as soon as they get on scene, what they're going to do is be looking for an officer to take them into the building, even though we hadn't stopped that active shooter, and they're going to start responding to those critical patients that possibly can be saved. And they will do what sounds very ugly. They will bypass people that they're not going to be able to save. That takes him away from somebody else, a casualty over here that possibly they can save. That's what you would see nowadays, or what you're probably going to see if an active shooter, heaven forbid, takes place. I want to talk about some other things here. First off, what gives us the authority to use deadly force? What gives us the authority to use force at all? Chapter 9 of the Penal Code. So you're looking at the deadly force code here. Right before that, section 931 is on self-defense. You could, if you want to get caught up on this, you can go and Google Penal Code, Texas Penal Code, and it'll give you all those statutes. So basically, a person is justified in using deadly force. Gosh, that light is so bright. Deadly force against another if the actor would be justified in using force against the other under Section 931, which I just referred to, when to the degree the actor reasonably believes the deadly force is immediately necessary to protect the actor against the other's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force, or to prevent the other's imminent commission of aggravated kidnapping, murder, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, robbery, or aggravated robbery. You have to believe that that is immediately necessary. Now notice in Section B there, to prevent the other's imminent commission of. It doesn't say against me, it just says the commission of. So you could be protecting yourself, you could be protecting a third party here and being justified in using this force. So basically if you're going to, whether it's use of force or deadly force, force is something that may cause an injury, but it's not going to cause serious bodily injury and it's not going to cause death. He's coming at me, he won't stop, I tell him to stop, he's trying to swing at me and I finally punch him in the nose, right? That is force. Deadly force is where I'm doing something that by whatever I'm using or by the act that I'm carrying out is very likely to cause either serious bodily injury or death. But it really doesn't matter. It's that way you're justified is somebody using unlawful use of force against you or a third person. You have the right to use that level of force to stop them. So, how many LTCs do we have in here? The better part of in here. So y'all probably already heard that aspect, right? Once or twice. I bet you heard this one too. And this is where it gets us. Does a bullet discriminate? I have yet to find a bullet that discriminates. So whatever direction that you have that barrel pointing, when you squeeze that trigger, that is the direction that bullet's going to go, and only go until something stops it or deflects it. What is it? The Matrix and a few of those other silly movies where they can, just as they're squeezing the trigger, they turn their wrist or something, the bullet does this. It doesn't work that way. It's going to go out the direction wherever your hand is. And it doesn't care who it hits. I think you think like that bullet, the bullet just like you do of the active shooter. They don't care. There's no mercy. They're going to go right into that direction. So, active shooter situation happens in your sanctuary. You're at the front, the active shooter's in the back. He's just boom, 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 shooting at people. And you have your pistol with you, and you decide that you're going to take him down. You're up here, you take a good aim, you've got a good sight picture, you squeeze the trigger, but this man here in, I think that's a gray shirt, maybe the light is messing up with my eyes, but let's say he suddenly steps up. Now where is that bullet going? It's probably going to hit him before it gets to your target. So afterwards, he falls to the ground, then you take out the bad guy. Then everybody comes and shows up. Police are there. You have people taking a report. You have some that are taking witness statements. The medical staff is there picking up people, put them in the ambulance, take them to the hospital. And then they get to our victim here, and they realize that after they do ballistics on the round that they pull out of his dead body, once he's has an autopsy, it doesn't match the rounds that the active shooter was using. And ballistics shows that it didn't come from behind where the active shooter was. Now what do we have to do? We have to assess why was that person dead, who shot him? And then we ultimately track the bullet back to you. Now what happens? That's where we get into this. Reckless injury of innocent third person. Even though an actor is justified under the chapter in threatening or using force or deadly force against another, and if in doing so he also recklessly injures or kills an innocent third person, justification afforded by this chapter is unavailable. Unavailable, that's what the key word you need to know. Unavailable in prosecution for the reckless injury or killing of the innocent third person. And then 9.06, civil remedies, unaffected. The fact that conduct is justified under this chapter does not abolish or impair any remedy for the conduct that is available in a civil suit. What that means is, yeah, but my intention was good. And after he dropped, I stopped the active shooter and he didn't kill any more people. That just right there says that doesn't matter. You still had a responsibility. You can't shoot innocent people. Could this happen? Has this happened? I don't know with citizens responding. I know it's happened in law enforcement numerous times. And then we have an inquiry, and then what happens from there? We don't know. We just have to see and see how it weighs out. Hopefully there would be some understanding in the circumstances, and understanding that maybe you did, even though you caused the death of another, maybe you saved some more lives because of your response. I don't know. But if nothing else, you're going to have to live with the fact that you shot and killed a fellow member of your church, right? People ask me, what do you think about people carrying weapons into their place of worship? I said, well, I don't have any problem with it. What I have a problem with, if I have a trained up veteran officer of 24 years, I'm not going to be very comfortable with him or her firing a weapon over a crowd of people. Yes, but he's a marksman. He's very accurate, never misses the target. Sure, but he also didn't know that he was going to stand up at that time. You don't have control of the people in between you. These are the things you really need to consider. I've lost count of the number of times that I would have been justified in using deadly force in 6 years that I've spent in patrol in my career. Probably reaching 8 to 10. But I never did have fired my weapon. And the reason why is because each time there was an innocent person nearby. So I was able to find cover, and we waited it out until we could address the situation in another way, or until somebody else could come from a different vantage point, take that person down. You have to think about these things. And if you don't train on it, then that's going to be a problem, because you're probably just going to boom, boom, boom. When I initially joined our tactical team, we had trainings, and it was some of the old TWU dorms that were about to be torn down. So I said, yeah, y'all do all the training you want in there. We don't care if you destroy anything, which was great for us. So we went in there, and they were our veteran members of the tactical team were putting on the training. And one of the things they had the paintball rifle. And it was adjustable, one of the old type adjustable. They could crank that sucker up. And let me tell you, they had it cranked up full. So they kept putting us in these no-win situations. And so we started out this one, and we're going down the middle hallway, and it is blacked out. You can't see anything. And I'm leading the stick, and suddenly, pow, 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 and I just feel stinging all up down my legs, and then on my left hand on my thumb. Felt like I got hit with a hammer. And short end of it, all right, end the exercise, turned the lights on, pulled up my pants leg, and I had welts that big around, about that raised. That's how hard that thing was hitting. And blood was shooting out of my thumb, because I nearly shattered my thumb. And they asked, so how many rounds did you fire? I said 3. We looked in the weapon. I had fired every round in that weapon. Situation under stress, how are you going to respond to it? I'd had little training at the time, so I was just, that hurts. I want to shoot back and stop whatever's causing me pain, right? I don't think I hit the suspect. He was hidden down, but they had a table set up, and he was hidden down behind it, and he was leaning over to the side shooting. So I shot down the hallway. Fortunately, we had no other actors down there to get hit by it. But what if there were people? What is the real scenario? What would have happened? It's one of those things. The reasons that we do those type of trainings in law enforcement, so it's an eye opener to you. Of course, that's our job, so we get lots of training. You've taken on the noble exercise of being a part of a security team. You need to take on the responsibility of making sure you're training as much as possible. I know it's very tough to find the time to train, but this is a time when you have a break in here to get to meet each other and say, you know what, y'all have got a 5-man security team, we've got a 10-man security team, y'all just live 10 minutes down the road, why don't we meet once a month or once a quarter and train together? You have actors to work, and you get a lot of knowledge between that many people to start to train better, right? This is a great opportunity. That's what we did. We would train together. We'd also try to get with other agencies and train as well so that we could set a more realistic situation, try to put each person in that very stressful situation to see how they respond, to start working for them to respond in a better manner in those circumstances. All right. Mark Twain said, "A man can seldom, very, very seldom, fight a winning fight against his training. The odds are too heavy." What does that mean? Maybe it means a lack of training, right? If you don't train very well, if you don't take it serious, you're fighting against yourself. I was certainly fighting against myself when my thumb hurts, boom, boom, boom. And then I had an empty gun. I didn't realize it was empty. You want some scripture backing? Whatever you do, we'll go from the New Testament. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not men. So if we're going to take on this endeavor, let's do it like we're doing it for the Lord, right? Gives a little more incentive, right? And if the Psalm of David, "Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." I don't think that we give enough credit for, in the Old Testament, when you saw the Israelites, they were training and had trained for war. Even David, as a young man, he killed a lion and a bear. He had trained to do that. He wasn't just this little boy that ran up and grabbed a slingshot. He had training behind him. Granted, he had the best support he could have, right? But he was prepared. Don't y'all? I believe that the Lord does His part, but He doesn't want us to be robots. He expects us to do our part. And so that's why training is very important for us. We need to make sure that we're getting as much in as we can. Good training, working with each other, working with other churches, gives us more people to help us with our training. I want to look at something real quick before I conclude. We talk about active shooter. But if you have somebody that's coming over from overseas and who's going to, let's just say they've been planning to take out an attack on the United States. Go back to September 11th. Was anybody in here going to notice those people training for that? No, because they weren't in your environment, right? We're not going to stop somebody who's overseas or who's 3 states away. We're not going to recognize that because we're not in their environment. If there's somebody that's lived in Nebraska and they've been training for 8 months to carry out this terroristic threat or terroristic act, but they plan to do it here at Denton Bible today, we would not be prepared to know about that person, to be able to see the changes that we're seeing in these people and their actions going on. What I really did is put this together because probably where it's going to apply to us, and maybe we can be proactive in this, aside from being train ourselves as best we can and being prepared the best we can, is understanding the mentality of an active shooter. But first off, and this is really important you understand these, desires to kill seriously and injure seriously without concern for their safety or threat of capture. Normally intended victims and searches them out. While they're doing that, we'll take anybody in the cursory as well. I'm not just looking for a specific person. That would be gravy on top of the chicken fried steak, right? But we'll take whatever comes along, make a bigger scene there. Shooter's mentality is not to escape. In other words, he is devoted to carrying out this act, so he doesn't care. What you'll find in this, there's no typical profile for this person. But usually it starts with a grievance. And what happens in this, some people, they cower down, they get in the ball, and I've got kids and blah, 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 and they give out these reasons why this person shouldn't shoot them. This person does not care. They don't care. They're just like that bullet that comes out of the gun. Their purpose is to go straight ahead and hit whatever in its way. That's the same thing with the active shooter. There is no mercy in their heart. And to think that there is just setting yourself up. You need to either run, hide, or fight. You've got to do something. You can't just roll up in the ball and ask for mercy. It doesn't happen. So understanding behavioral indicators, their changes in behavior is going to help you with that situation. We're going to talk about the pathway to violence here. 6 stages: presence of a grievance, ideation of violence stage, planning stage, preparatory stage, breach or probing stage, and then the actual attack. So, the grievance. Somebody irritated you. Somebody wronged you. They didn't apologize for it. It didn't turn out the way you wanted. How do we normally act? I pout and I get mad. I might let out a word or two that I have to repent for later on, right? And then a couple of days later we move on, we forget about it. This is a situation where you have somebody who they just hang on that grievance. Don't like that we weren't part of something. You didn't include us in everything. We turned into the trench coat mafia or whatever because you wouldn't let us be part of your little clique. Whatever that may be. They hold on to that grievance. So instead of talking about it every so often, they just continue to hold on to that for weeks and even months and maybe even longer. You've probably seen this happen before, but after a week or two it dies down and then they're back to being the normal co-worker that you've seen or the normal person in your church setting. So when it gets to ideation of violent stage, that's where they start thinking about it, envisioning violence as a resolution. So they might start being vocal about it where you're sitting down at lunch and you know, Jack, that guy's just a jerk. It would be funny as could be. I would laugh until I cried if somebody just walked up and punched him in the face. They start really getting pleasure of thinking of something bad happening to that person. This is where you need to really start paying attention. You've got the grievance. Now you've got the ideation of some type of violent act. Now they're starting to plan. You need to open your eyes here, people, because right here you can start to intercede and you may be able to change something. You may be able to say, Pastor, there is something wrong with Bill. He's talked about this situation. He won't let it go. It's 6 months later now, and he was even talking about how funny it would be if this happened to this person. As they were walking up the steps, they slipped and fell and broke their neck. I think we need some intervention here. This is a time that you can possibly turn this person back. If we hear these things, we've probably heard and seen some people acting this way, and we thought, I don't want to get involved, or this isn't my business, or the pastor's not going to do anything, so I'm not going to say anything to him about it, and they just let it go. And most of the time, it doesn't turn into that violent act, but what if it does? We could have stopped it here, but we didn't. This is when they get into the who, what, where, when. The why is, you've already talked about that, the grievance and so forth. They start thinking about, how can I do this? When would be the best time to do this and when they be most vulnerable? They start thinking about these things, start to plan. Preparation stage. So what do they need to do to prepare for this? Well, obviously, our Columbine terrorists, they got on the internet, they learned how to make bombs, didn't do a very good job of it, but they acquired weapons, they learned how to shoot them. They looked at the best time to go into the school. They knew when not to be noticed. And then they carried out the act, right? So maybe it's the Zarnov brothers. What did the older brother do? He was constantly working out, kickboxing and other things to get himself in better shape for this episode, right? And they carried out a pretty violent act even after the bombing, didn't they? They put their work into it. This wasn't something they just threw together. They had been planning for a long time. And then there's the fact of, how do I carry this out? Well, I've got to get weapons. I've got to get a code to that gate because they keep it locked all the time. Or I got to know that this is the time when this door is open. I've got to get bolt cutters or something to get in there. They're getting this information. And then the probing and breaching. This is where they start testing it out. How far can you get if you go down this direction? Is anybody going to stop you if you go in this door? Do they have any type of metal detectors? Do they pat you down? All these different things. And then, of course, the last stage is carrying out that attack. I know I went over that real fast. I will make sure this wasn't on what I had given Chuck, these last few slides. I'll make sure that Chuck has them. If you want them, he can send them to you. But these are the things where we can be proactive and we can possibly stop a active shooter, active violence act happening by paying attention to what's going on around us. And hopefully in your place of worship, you'd be concerned enough about somebody in there that has that type of grievance. If they are that upset over something, there needs to be some intervention because it's causing them a lot of grief. And once it gets to that planning stage, they want to put grief on everybody else, and that's where it carries to. All right, I appreciate y'all's time. I know that we got started late and we're probably hanging over, but remember to do this with all your heart. Find the time to do it. Do good training. There's not going to be excuses really accepted afterwards. And there's lots of people out there who don't like the fact that you have a license to carry. And they're looking at something to jump on. Don't give them the opportunity. Thank you for having me. Y'all have a blessed day.